Thank you.
Yeah. So thank you for joining us this evening.
Hi, everyone.
Or this morning, whenever it happens to be.
Yeah, we're actually on a round globe. And so, yeah, it's hard to know what time it is. It's really strange. But particularly in the digital age.
Yeah. So we had this thought about really looking at the digital age as it relates to yoga and yoga as it relates to the digital age. And the fact that there are a lot of parallels and there are a lot of differences, and both are here to stay. We hope at least yoga is here to stay. And we're pretty sure the digital age for now is here to stay.
At least a few more months.
Yeah, at least a few more months. So we wanted to just sort of explore that with, coming at it from some of the foundation of the teachings of yoga. And Richard and I were talking about it earlier today and thinking about, well, how do you define yoga? How do you define the digital age? And yoga, in different things that we've written or talked about or whatever, we've even in the last talk we did, we were saying yoga is yoking and then unyoking. Yoga is relationship. Mm-hmm. Yoga is actually freedom. That's one of the things that happens automatically, is that yoga has this potential for freedom. And the relationship part is that yoga has this potential, that yoga has the potential to have the embodied experience of relationships, interconnectedness. And we also have talked about the importance of really deeply listening, which is a skill we cultivate in yoga, but that's where yoga begins. And listening through all of the senses, not just listening through the ears, but listening in terms of really waking up to what is right before our eyes.
Exactly, yeah.
And then the digital age really has some of those same things going on with it, that it gives us this idea that there is this incredible interconnectedness. It gives us this idea that we are in relationship with others and with the world as a whole. And in a sense, because when we are dealing with things in a digital way, there isn't this same kind of relationship. And so part of the problem that happens is isolation, which actually happens in yoga as well. If we become too dogmatic, if we, physically isolate ourselves into a mind state or into a physical space in order to practice our yoga.
Yeah, and the problem, or part of the meaning of the word digital, is that everything is being reduced to digits. And so it's a kind of reductionism where you don't really pay attention to what is the most satisfying, wonderful thing, which in yoga we discover, but you're paying attention to the labels or the little categories that you throw it in. And then in this digital age, you want to kind of simplify it. If I can reduce it to 25 words or less, I don't know what the current limitations are on certain media, but if it's really brief, then you really get the illusion that you know it, that you understand it. And so, and that's to confuse something, the thing in itself, which is quite amazing, with the descriptions you have of it, the categories you have of it. That's the definition of ignorance. in the yoga tradition. And then what we find that ignorance is sort of extremely useful thing uh, because you can craft it in order to, in interesting ways, communicate that which is really important, even though you can't really describe it completely. You know, you can be skillful, and that's the challenge in the digital age, because uh, the it can be used, you know, for great suffering. You know, you can really take people off into what we call them, conspiracy theories, um, complete fantasies, and you can twist, you can flip things over, and so it's a great medium for people who want to scam others, cheat others, control others.
Well, and the whole medium is, as you know, based on the idea of algorithms, and algorithms operate on the premise that they are sort of generalizing and in a way speaking or identifying the smallest common denominator, the lowest common denominator of certain aspects of behavior or thinking or interest, and then making them even smaller. And so with media as well as with yoga, there is this tendency of mind to do that, and that's a tendency of human mind. And we've talked often about the idea of needing to know and being uncomfortable with not knowing, which is this vastness that is surrounding us. And in order to navigate in the world, it's important to be able to think we know things and then to be able to let them go. But in yoga and in the digital world as well, sometimes, in particular in the digital world, we get very, very stuck with this, with the algorithms that we have either set up in our practices, or that if any of you have seen, there's a new movie out called The Social Dilemma that talks about how the media, some of the social platforms on social media were not designed as evil things to begin with, but that because of a sense actually of greed, that is one of the seeds of human nature that we try not to water, that the that the algorithms became much more important than the actual people who were at the other end of the algorithms. And we do that in a sense with yoga sometimes as well, and that's what we want to explore. That both of these things, the media and the digital approach to the world, as well as yoga, can sort of be these amazing tools, but they both can also sort of perpetuate greed. They can perpetuate separateness. They can perpetuate illusion. And we know that very well on social media and fake news.
And none of this is new to humanity. It's kind of the definition of humanity historically, but it's been sped up millions of times now.
And that's one of the aspects of the digital age that we're kind of in this strange space with now, as we're recording this in the middle of the pandemic, where we're locked down and things have been slowed down, that we're having time to look at, oh my God, these are how much speed has been put upon us, the value of things being speedy. How much of that has been put upon us in the last number of years? And is it really the best way to do things speedily? And when we have illusions, and when we are trying to look for the joining together of complementary opposites so that things can evolve, if we must do things quickly, things fall by the wayside. And so patience, trust, those things are equally important to the process that we're facing, and somehow being able to learn them in yoga and then filter them into what we're doing digitally is kind of a new art form.
Yeah. So we're hoping it's a brilliant creative tool. And that's the hope we have, is that as people connect, then they start to become inspired and embodied also, even though we're more embodied in our cell phones than we are in our historical bodies. But we hope to, work that. And that's the skill, that's the art that hopefully we can learn. And
yeah, I did a retreat the other weekend with Ponlop Rinpoche, whom I recommend highly to any of you who are looking for some teachings. And he was great. He was talking about how, we lose our mind, and we lose our mind often through digital means, but also just being in the world. And that doesn't bother us that much, but we lose our cell phone, and there's a major issue, So, yeah.
it does represent the soul, or the subtle body, unfortunately.
And so we come back to this idea that greed, that illusion, in particular, those two things, let's tease them apart a little bit and see how they, how they impact us, and also how we can understand those aspects of human nature.
Mm-hmm.
You
Shall I tell the story?
Yeah.
Okay. When in doubt, tell a story. So a long time ago, in some of the highest heavens, the highest gods in Indian mythology, they have a banker, a treasurer, to deal with their enormous wealth, because
Okay, they own universes.
They, more than even multinational companies, they own multi-universal, galactic companies through their skill. And so, but they have an investment banker called Kubera, and that's his job. And he's very, very pious,
and
orthodox.
He's good at his job.
Oh, he's obviously very good at his job. And so he wanted to gain more piety, because Shiva, who is always covered with snakes and cremation ash, and is considered to be, kind of the shadow side. He wanted Shiva to come to his house, or I should say his palace, up in heaven, so that he could feed Shiva and gain all the merit. And that way, he figured that was a great investment move, I think. And so he went to Shiva on Mount Kailash, and he invited him, and Shiva said, basically, no way am I coming to your house, but I'll send my son. And that's little Ganesh. And he said, but I warn you, he has a big appetite. And Kubera, being, the extremely wealthy, said, oh, no problem, we can feed him. And Shiva said, well, I warned you. And so little Ganesh went there, and he started to eat, and they were bringing him things, and all with great royal treatment and things. And he seemed to have no end to his appetite, and he literally ate out, the equivalent of 16,000 palaces worth of, food. And then he kept going.
Yeah, and he was saying, he was eating the silverware, and he was eating,
Yeah.
you
He
know,
started eating the tablecloths,
yeah.
and he started eating, and he said, "I'm hungry, feed me." And finally, it was a bit of a crisis that was occurring, because he was starting to eat, pieces of the palace and the ground, and he would even eat people if he were hungry enough. And this is a great throwback that there are traditional deities who are extremely hungry, and if they lose control, they can eat the entire universe, because hunger has no limit. Just like the ego, or if you owned 15 billion universes, well, let's double that, and there's no end to that kind of greed or hunger. And so Kubera, being a responsible investor and money manager, he went back and he asked Shiva, what is going on? It's like, help. This is destroying the heavens. This kid of yours is going to eat the entire universe. And so we got to do him. And Shiva said, oh, no problem. It's actually easy. If you get simple rice, and if you offer it to him,
Toast it.
if you toast the
Yeah.
rice, which is an art in India in a special way, and offer it to him as an offering, then he'll be satisfied. But you have to give it to him without any hope of anything, just as a pure gift. And so Kubera did this, and he actually made a devotional offering.
By the time he got back, by the way, Ganesh had eaten not only his palace, but the entire village. And so things were looking pretty bad.
They were looking bad. And he gave this, and then all of a sudden, Ganesh said, oh, thank you. And he laughed.
And so the real, moral or whatever of that story is, that Kubera was very greedy, but also he was not humble. He was very, very proud, and
due to ignorance.
And so Ganesh was, in a way, reflecting exactly this greed and exactly this lack of humility.
Yeah, that's Ganesh's specialty,
Yeah.
is to deal with obstacles like greed. And because with ignorance, Kubera and many of the gods, occasionally they would wake up and be enlightened, but they had no end to their desires. And so they were never satisfied. Even becoming Indra was not satisfying. And so that's because they had, through ignorance, they identified with the storylines, with the digital reduction or ideas about who they were and what was necessary in life.
Yeah, and they, we talked about the addictive qualities that yoga has, that being connected digitally also has. And they became addicted. And addiction, is this, word of our times, but it's also, an aspect of human nature to become just obsessed and to become so engaged in something, like Ganesh was when he was eating, not thinking, oh, I'm going to teach. He wasn't, Ganesh was the innocent one there. He was the child, and he was reflecting the scene. And so he was reflecting this aspect of how we interface with things that might be healthy in small ways, or not even healthy at all, but healthy in small ways like yoga. If yoga becomes something that is such an obsession and addiction, it becomes something that is not good. It becomes something that can do more harm than you might imagine. And the same is true with greed, with Kubera's own, addiction to his wealth and to his image. And so We want to really look closely at the way we discern how we are approaching things that are consuming huge amounts of our intelligence and huge amounts of our life, which for all of us who practice yoga, especially these days, it's the yoga practices and it's interfacing with others through the medium of digital medium. And so there's this strange sort of imbalance that we're teetering on the edge of all the time. And the illusion that both of those can promote within us, the illusions of self-grandeur, of self-importance, of storylines that really aren't true, but that we want to be true, or that we imagine to be true, that get in the way of actually waking up and actually being of service.
Yeah. So just remind me of the Yoga Sutra. If you do a yoga posture well, prayatna shaitilya, and then there's a release of all effort, which effort is the grasping, and the mind naturally, spontaneously goes into focus on infinity, which is quite beyond the ability to reduce it to a name or form or story. It can't be reduced to that. And so that's the amazing thing of embodiment, which is the offering that we have. And you can actually do yoga classes online. Although it's...
yeah, we've been doing a few.
But the embodiment part is quite interesting. Yeah. And so it really takes this keen sword that, is the secret of yoga, which is discriminating awareness. And that sword, it cuts apart the samyogas, which are links, things get linked together that shouldn't be linked together too tightly. Like, a very brief explanation of, let's say a global pandemic or something.
It's just bring it up.
In other words, in good science, you will make hypotheses, and then you'll do experiments and things. You get feedback, and then you can upgrade the hypotheses again and again and again. But if you have a particular motive, like making a bunch of money out of the whole thing, or gaining control over a population, you won't use the sort of discriminating awareness, because you're taking your own storyline and confusing yourself, or hallucinating a non-existent self into that. And so the sword has to apply very carefully. And in yoga practice, sometimes we learn to concentrate, and often based on sincere, brief experiences of infinity, if that's a good word. But then the habitual storyline takes over again, and we run off, and we actually become self-obsessed, just like a lot of people with their cell phones. If you look at someone's cell phone and you see lipstick on it, that's not a good sign. Okay. Because they've fallen in love, but not actually with themselves or others, but they've fallen in love with the picture
with
on
their
the screen.
Image. Yeah.
And that's so they desperately need. It used to be just hand mirrors, You'd find someone's hand mirror, and if it had lipstick on it, then it was not a subtlety. But now it's the phone. or whatever they identify with, as a it could even be a group or anything. And that other funny story
Yeah.
is funny. So there was a very great yogi called Vasishta, who is the main character of the Yoga Vasishta, and he's a genius, a poet, but he's also a comedian. I think primarily he's a comedian. Um,
And the Yoga Vasishta, some of you have studied parts of it with us, and it is an amazing text because it is a story that it has a series of stories that are stories within stories, within stories, within stories. And when you read it, and it's a very, very, very long book, so there are texts that are sort of truncated versions of it that have left out all the beautiful descriptive
descriptions of nature. It's descriptions of the environment, of those little beautiful things, which is my favorite part of the book.
And so if you ever do see a version of the Yoga Vasishta that is, one of the more complete versions, and read these nature descriptions, what they really offer is this holistic, the meta perspective on the story that is being told. It is these huge, detailed, tiny detailed. Yeah, there. Thank you, Val.
That the entire universe is there in a drop of nectar. Oh, he's got one.
He's got one.
Or, just in the touch of the breeze, or the
So Val's showing one up.
And that's the Lagu Yoga Vasishta.
Yeah.
Oh, no, it's the fat one. Oh, good.
And, and part of what we see every time we read it, different stories from it, is this tendency of mind to have stories within stories within stories.
And there's no outer story. And that's what you find out, that what you think, that's the story that explains everything, it's the big God or something. And then you find out, that's just a story that was inside. And so every little thing that you encounter immediately contains the whole. You can see the entire universe in every little speck. And so Vasishta, he tells the story about once upon a time, and he's also a comedian, so like he used to say, everything I say is a joke. And then you go, that's a joke. Okay. He said, just because the world was so busy around him, okay, which is like, he went off to a yoga hut, and he sat and he did his yoga for thousands of years, as he was good at. And then he had, was in the deepest samadhi, and he went off, and in a corner of that universe, he created a little planet. And on that planet, there was this...
He heard the woman singing.
Yeah.
First, when he was in the hut, didn't he? Or no?
Not yet.
Oh, okay.
No, this is on the other planet.
On the other planet.
Yeah, I get the stories all mixed up. Okay.
Unlike me.
Yeah. Anyway, so he's in samadhi, and he creates this beautiful little imaginary world. And he knew, this is my imaginary world, way off in the void. And he even envisioned it as, maybe 10 light years away. And in it, he saw, he had the revelation that every point on that planet was divine. And he actually made the statement that every little speck of this is the center, and you can see all of the rest in the entire universe within each speck. And so that everything is extreme. The particulars, the unique individual arising of like what you're having right now, is the sacred, that which is particular, unique, but it's also sacred. And then while he was in that revelation, kind of, and in a sense, you could see he was congratulating himself in his own story. Then he heard the voice of a woman.
It was right
calling.
about the time he thought, finally, I'm enlightened.
Yeah, and this lovely voice called out to him. What did she say? What was that?
She was just singing.
Yeah, she was singing a song.
Yeah, she was singing, and it brought him out of his, trance a little bit. And he thought, how could this woman have found me in this space that I'm in, that is this sort of
divine enlightened. So he was thinking, oh, I have this enlightened space. And she was calling to him to come and to check out her house.
Because she'd been, she had been brought to this house by her husband, who was a great yogi, and her house was in a rock, in a stone.
It was just a solid stone.
Yeah.
Like that.
And her husband was this great yogi who had done all kinds of yoga practices, who himself was very much felt that he was enlightened. And he had sort of not been interfacing with his wife. And his wife was saying, to Vasishta was saying, you really have to come and witness this. This is a problem. And my husband and I need to.
Yeah, they need counseling.
We need counseling.
Somehow in the middle of Vasishta's great meditation, he's imagining all of this stuff. And then they look, and Vasishta says, that's just a solid rock. You can't live inside a solid rock, and he's, interesting enough, he's very skeptical. And then she says, no, you got to come into this with me. And she invites Vasishta, and all he has to do, and she pulls him into the rock, and inside the rock, there are all of these different people. It's a whole environment, beautiful skies and trees and the whole ecosystem. And it's like amazing. And then Vasishta sees that every point inside the solid rock is extremely sacred and contains the entire universe in it, which was supposedly his original realization. But this lady, and so he comes out.
Yeah.
And again, finally, at the end of that story, he again is repeating the fact, inside of everything, if you look closely at the unique, what's called Vishesha, or the irreducible to name and story, but even the names and stories are irreducible. So even thought itself is unthinkable as a phenomenon.
And he has the realization, of course, at the end that this has all been his illusion, the entire story, in a sense, as is the world, the way we make it into our private stories.
Yeah, and he's delightfully embarrassed, but that's his special.
So at that moment, he has a moment of realizing this, this nature of the mind, to start to believe the illusions, whether they are, our Instagram feed, whether they are these great moments of mystical, insight that we might be fortunate enough to have, that they are sacred, but so are,
all these other things.
All the other
they're
things.
Sacred within their context.
They're sacred within their context.
And context is sacred. But if you don't have discriminating awareness, it's just suffering.
Yeah.
And
so we feel this, what's fascinating about the Yoga Vasishta is it's this sort of type of storytelling, where you get sucked down almost into a rabbit hole of, story within story within story, which if you've ever Googled something, you might have had a similar experience where you get sucked into these, troughs of infinite information. And the art form is to, number one, be able to discern what is actual truth and what is fake news, as has become a, or what is propaganda. Fake news is the new way we're describing it, but everybody who puts anything into words, myself included, or anyone, you have your own bias. And therefore, if you've created an algorithm for the internet, if you've created your own algorithm for life, you have your own bias that then shows up. And if you don't exercise the pause that is required to really look again, then you go off down rabbit holes, whether you're on the internet or doing your yoga, where you start believing the story to be true, and you've lost the sense of inquisitiveness and looking at what's actually arising, rather than ignoring what's arising that doesn't support the storyline you're believing, and kind of grasping for bits and pieces of story that do support the storyline that meets your bias.
But you don't know for sure.
Yeah.
That's the thing, is knowledge is context dependent.
Yeah.
And so the best advice is keep good posture when you're sucked into the digital media. And that way, you'll have a sense of humor, and you won't be, that way you're in touch with what's important rather than what's, because sometimes knowing whether something it's a rabbit hole or not a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
It probably is a rabbit hole, but knowing, you might not be able to know.
Yeah. And some of the rabbit holes are valuable. It's
there's
just
some
you
really
go
great
off
ones,
on these tangents that can last for lifetimes.
But within that tangent, there's still the ability to be humble and to be of service to others, and to find reality even in the rabbit hole.
And it's quite fascinating. And another parallel, and also these have very different visceral experiences, but we invite you to explore this in the next week or so, as as you are working on your yoga, and as you're working on your sitting practice, and as you're working at the computer. But the digital media really is this sort of training of mind. And that sounds familiar to us. What we do in yoga, what we do in meditation, is we are training the mind to have focus. We are cultivating the skill of focused attention. And so you can, as you go onto your emails, or you go into checking the news or whatever, and all this time goes by very, very quickly. And in one way, in some strange sense, this is a type of mind focus that is extraordinarily powerful. And then you go into yoga, or you go into your sitting practice, those two in particular. And there is this aspect of mind focus that the breathing and the gaze really facilitate. And so the thing that is interesting that I've been playing with in the last week or so, thinking about this topic, is to viscerally sense and viscerally pay attention to, bring my awareness to the physical sensation of the difference between those two kinds of focus of mind. And not so much necessarily when you are in the process of engaging in them. In other words, when you're on the computer, not ruining your time on the computer thinking about what am I experiencing, etc., but to notice the fact that, oh, my mind has been quite focused. in yoga practice or on my computer. And then in reference to our last talk, step away from either of those and see what the residue in your body, in your mind, in your emotion, in your actions. See if you can start noticing patterns of residue that you experience. And when you experience patterns that are more sort of confining, like the feeling in your head when you get away from the computer, that sometimes where you feel like you just need to go, you know, like that or something, that feeling, which you do. I usually don't feel like that after yoga. I've done that during yoga. And so when you have these confined and constricted feelings, to pause and to think about methods that you can use to continue to focus the mind, but do so in a way that doesn't leave that kind of sort of negative samskaric residue. And then pay attention to yoga, because if you are approaching yoga with the same sort of grasping, with greed, or really getting caught in the illusion of what you believe the yoga to be, the residue and the embodied feeling after might be more similar to what it feels like to be engaged in a one-sided event, which is the digital age, than yoga should be or could be. Because as we were saying at the beginning, yoga really is about this interfacing of relationship. And though there is a certain aspect of relationship that is facilitated through digital media, there is something profoundly missing. And it's wonderful to be able to connect as we now can in this sort of method. But there is also something, there's something beyond it that if one of you can figure out how to capture that feeling and that ability to connect deeply, like to let our mirror neurons really work digitally, we might have something.
Well, a three-dimensional spherical computer screen all around you that
it's coming.
would allow you to open the central channel while you're online.
While you're online. Yeah.
In the meantime.
Yeah. And so
it's a mystery.
So we say, why is yoga important in this digital time? And it is important because, when we're doing it correctly, we really do start to have the ability to have, to look deeply at ourselves and our illusions and our deceptions that we perpetuate, our own algorithms of reducing our experiences in a way that eliminates potential, that eliminates relationship.
It's miserable.
Yeah. So pay attention as you practice. And really, if you find just practically, I work with a man at Being with Dying who's this wonderful neuroscientist, Al Kazniak. And he's kind of got the Bill Gates posture, which is kind of like with the head forward and the shoulders up. And Al has the term for, the eye hunch, which is what most of, the world is now coming to, where we're just like so. And if you're noticing that, these are the practical things, as Richard was saying, even when you're doing your phone, sit up and tap in, plug yourself in.
Right. So these are sciences that are evolving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
sooner the better. Well,
Yeah, so greed, illusion, delusion, the feeling in your head when you're really connecting deeply. And one final thing we were talking about the other day with discernment or with discriminating awareness is to look at that as this ability that we cultivate to combine the intuitive sense, the gut sense of what is true and real and beyond words with thought. And in that space, to then see through the illusions of mind, like the guy in the cave or in the hut could see through his own illusions for a split second. So to really let those two aspects of the experience be the guiding force in discernment, in discriminating awareness, because in that way we then can be nice, and we can be nice to ourselves, and we can be of service to others, which is nice. I mean, that's being nice to ourselves.
That's true. It's the only satisfying thing.
Yeah.
And that's a mental paradox.
Yeah.
I love you because it makes me feel good. Well, loving you makes me feel good. I don't love you because it makes me feel good.
Yeah, if you love someone because it makes you feel good, then do you really love them?
Right, or you're just loving the sensations that arise. Yeah, you're not seeing,
Don't think about that one too much.
Yeah.
Or do. Yeah. So we hope this has shed a little light on something for you. And do you want to chant? Is there a chant? Just the closing chant? Or the Ganesh chant?
Oh, the Ganesh chant.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So remembering Ganesh.
Yeah. Ganapati. Okay. So he's the Pati, the Lord of all the Ganas, who are usually creatures of darkness, all kinds of ghosts and goblins and suffering. And through basically seeing them, with his brilliant intelligence, which is he transmutes them, and that removes actually our obstacles, because those aspects of our own mind are our obstacles that create suffering. So it's a beautiful chant. You probably already know it, but you must sit straight if you're going to do it. Okay. And you have to imagine that you are Ganapati, big belly. I'll try to chant in a key that
I may
works.
chant or not.
Oh,
depending.
okay. Om Gananam Tva Ganapatikam Avamahe Kavim Kavinam Upamashravastamam Jeshtarajam Brahmanam Brahmanaspatana Shrinvanu Tibisiddha Sadhanam. Om Gam Ganapataye Namaha.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. I'm going to stop recording.